most people's sense of identity, or part of most people's sense of identity, is to do with their gender. So how large that part is varies from person to person and from culture to culture. So by that I mean a man feeling his sense of self consists partly of his awareness of being a man. In some cultures, that makes up, in some cases, 70% of a man's identity is the fact that he's a male. These tend to be traditional cultures where the roles, the division between genders is very pronounced. And a woman, equally, in those cultures, a large part of her sense of identity or a sense of self would be around being a woman. In the Western world, this is not quite as pronounced, although it's still there, but there's less identification for a man or woman with being a woman than in some traditional cultures, and than it was in the past in the West also. So especially with people becoming more conscious, the genders are coming a little closer together. And that may well be true that there are more people now who may not even be certain what gender they are. And so that is not necessarily a bad thing, although it can be confusing for those people, because, especially if they're young, because everybody's looking for a sense of identity, a clearly defined sense of identity. And if they don't know whether they're a man or a woman, then there seems to be something lacking. They cannot form any clear sense of identity based on gender, which seems to be an obstacle, but does not have to be if they were given appropriate spiritual guidance. They could be shown. In fact, it could be an advantage to not know whether you are there or there, because it could make it easier for you to disidentify from identification with form, because ultimately that's what it is, male or female forms. So if those people could be helped, then they would find out that actually it can be an advantage, so that they can derive their sense of identity not from the physical vehicle, because the physical vehicle may be uncertain. So they could perhaps more easily than somebody who feels very strongly, I'm a man and you are my woman. Wasn't there a famous pop song? No, it was the other way around. It was the Canadian singer from Montreal, what was her name? Celine Dion. I am a woman and you are my man, something like that. So this is a good example of, and that was a very successful song, because it strengthened every woman who listened to that could identify with, yeah, I'm a woman, and then and then you were out in a bar, and then you meet a man. This could be my man, and the man did the same. Oh, there's my woman. So you can see how much identity there is in that, and it's ego. It's really, there's a masculine ego and there's a feminine ego. In some cultures, a woman has a particularly defined. In some cultures, it seems that every woman has a high-pitched voice. But it's because it's part of the ego role that they adopt. In other cultures, a woman is conditioned to behave in a particular way. She behaves in certain constrained way. Just can't laugh too loud. There was even a pronouncement made by a politician in one of those countries that a woman should not laugh in public. It's not becoming to a woman to laugh in public. So, whereas in the United States, it's perfectly acceptable for a woman to laugh out loud. You see it often. So it's a trap to derive your psychological identity from your male gender or your female gender. Both of them are trapped in their little worlds, their little identities. So we are going beyond that, and I believe in the more distant future for mankind, the two will come together at some point. Anyway, but for the time being, let's see if we can help those who are uncertain about their gender and point to them the possibility of not identifying with any gender and so go deeper immediately. So maybe if anybody who comes into contact with young people who are uncertain, perhaps you could point that out. It could be the beginning of a spiritual path. Sometimes the greatest difficulty in life, or early in life, is at the same time the opening into spiritual awakening. So that can also be the case, or it used to be more so in the past, for a gay person, man or woman. It still presents certain, even though now there's greater acceptance around it, it still presents certain challenges. And in the past, it was a gigantic challenge because it was rejected by society. So in the past, if a man or woman who was gay immediately was an outsider, at least internally, and there was now it's much easier to, at least in Western countries, to accept that. The trap here could be, there is another trap here, that you find it sometimes with gay people that instead of going beyond gender identification, they have a very strong identification with being gay. So, and then they overemphasize the gayness, and that becomes an ego role that they play. That was the trap for those people. So there's always, you need to be beware, because there are many situations where the ego can come in and use it for its purposes. I mentioned in The Power of Now, for a gay person, the advantage is that to some extent, even though there's greater acceptance nowadays, a gay person can still feel a little bit of an outsider. And so that's always a great advantage for anybody who does not fit in totally with the mainstream, because that can create an early disidentification from mainstream egoic identities, and then the arising of spiritual awakening can become easier.